Most actors leave behind a legacy, but Peter Breck? He left behind a storm. Known for his explosive energy on screen, Breck was more than just a cowboy in a classic westerny, was a man burning with passion, intensity, and in some cases, pure hatred. While fans adored his performance as Nick Barkley on The Big Valley, what they didn't see was the brutal tension boiling behind the scenes. One co-star, in particular, didn't just rub Breck the wrong way, he became the one person Peter truly despised. But that's only part of the story. From tragic loss to late career transformations and a secret rivalry that never cooled down, Peter Breck's life was far more complicated than the tough characters he played. And what happened off camera might just change the way you see him forever. Peter Breck wasn't born into fame. In fact, acting was never the plan. Born in Rochester, New York in 1929, Peter's childhood was shaped by two things: discipline and creativity. His father, a jazz musician turned art museum director, exposed him to the world of artistic expression early on. But Peter? He wasn't chasing stages or cameras. Not yet. After high school, he joined the Navy not for adventure. But because structure made sense to him, that military mindset stayed with him for life. Only after his service did Breck take a sharp left turn. Drama school at the University of Houston. That's where it started. Not with a spotlight, but with a stage, a quiet theater, and a man learning how to channel everything boiling under the surface into performance. His time at the Alley Theater in Houston changed everything. It wasn't just about acting, it was about commanding presence, something Breck would become known for. And when he finally moved to Los Angeles, that presence exploded onto television screens almost immediately. But what came next would push Breck into a spotlight he never expected, and lock him into a genre that both made him a star and boxed him in. Hollywood in the late 50s was wild with Western fever, and Peter Breck rode straight into the heart of it. After a few sharp standout roles in shows like Maverick and 77 Sunset Street Rip, casting directors saw something in him. Something intense, controlled, but volatile. It didn't take long before he was typecast. Not because he lacked range, quite the opposite, but because no one else could deliver that raw, explosive energy quite like he could. He was the guy you called when you needed someone who could be both tough as nails and heartbreakingly human. And then came The Big Valley. Cast as Nick Barkley, Breck wasn't just playing a role, was defining a type. Hot-headed, loyal, and just barely restrained. His character lit up the screen. Paired with legends like Barbara Stanwyck and Linda Evans, he didn't fade into the background, he stood out. Even next to Stanwyck's powerhouse performances, Breck held his own with fire in his voice and fury in his eyes. But as his fame climbed, something else started happening. He became that guy, the Western guy. Producers stopped seeing him as anything more. To them, he was a cowboy, plain and simple, and no matter how hard he tried to push beyond that image, the industry had already made up its mind. He had become a star, yes, but one caught in a golden cage of six-shooters and saddle dust. What happened behind the scenes of The Big Valley, though that was a different kind of storm. Behind the camera of The Big Valley, something ugly was brewing, and it had nothing to do with ratings or scripts. It was personal. Peter Breck had a deep, burning resentment toward one of his co-stars, Richard Long. To the outside world, they played brothers. On screen, they fought side by side, part of the same tight-knit family. But off-screen, Breck couldn't hide his disgust. Crew members would whisper about the tension, how Breck's friendly energy turned cold the moment Long walked onto set. To Breck, Richard Long wasn't just annoying, he was everything wrong with Hollywood. Where Breck was fiery, passionate, and unpredictable, Long was calm, controlled, and polished. Too polished. Breck saw it as fake. He believed Long used charm to manipulate situations, cozying up to producers, subtly shifting things in his favor. Whether it was paranoia or perception, Breck felt undermined and he never forgot it. The resentment ran so deep, it lingered for decades. Even in interviews long after the show ended, Breck would sing the praises of Stanwyck and Majors, but say nothing about Long. That silence said more than words ever could. Some suspected Breck envied the way Long navigated the industry easily, effortlessly, without the same grind. But others said it wasn't envy at all, it was principle. Breck hated what Long represented: smooth politics over raw talent, flash over fire. And for Breck, a man who prided himself on authenticity, that was unforgivable. But even as this feud simmered off screen, Peter's real heartbreak would strike in a way no rivalry ever could. While Breck's on-screen battles and backstage tensions made headlines, nothing could compare to the quiet, soul-crushing pain he endured behind closed doors. His proudest role wasn't as Nick Barkley or any of his other tough guy characters was as a father. Peter and his wife Diane shared a rare kind of Hollywood love story, grounded, genuine, and enduring. When their son Christopher was born, it changed everything. Breck, known for his intensity on set, would soften instantly around his boy. He showed up for games, school events, whatever he could fit between shoots. He wasn't just playing the family man on television, he was living it. But that life took a brutal turn. In his early 30s, Christopher was diagnosed with leukemia. The news hit like a freight train. Peter, who had faced every kind of scripted tragedy in his career, now faced one he couldn't rewrite. He and Diane fought desperately through treatments, hospitals, and endless uncertainty clinging to hope that their son would pull through. But despite every effort, Christopher's battle ended in heartbreak. He passed away at just 30 years old. The loss shattered them. Friends said Peter changed after that, still kind, still professional but quieter, like something inside him had dimmed. He didn't speak about it publicly, but those close to him could see the weight he carried every single day. And yet, he never let go of his son's memory. He and Diane honored Christopher in quiet, personal ways, proof that love, even when broken by loss, doesn't disappear. But grief wasn't the only battle Peter would face in the years that followed. In an industry built on fake smiles and forced chemistry, Peter Breck had always prided himself on keeping it real. But even among the egos and on-set tensions, there was one person he simply could not tolerate: Richard Long. To fans of the Big Valley, they were brothers. On screen, Nick and Jared Barkley stood side by side, fighting for justice and family. But behind the scenes, it was a cold war. Breck didn't just dislike Long, he despised him. It wasn't about petty disagreements or artistic differences. It was deeper, uglier. Breck felt that Long exuded a smug, condescending attitude, like he believed himself above everyone else. While Breck gave 110% in every performance, throwing his body and soul into every scene, Long's polished, methodical style struck Peter as arrogant, even manipulative. Crew members noticed the tension immediately. When the cameras stopped rolling, the energy between them shifted. Breck, usually upbeat and approachable, would go quiet, visibly irritated by Long's presence. There were reports of Breck storming off set, barely speaking a word if Long was nearby. The hostility was impossible to miss. Some say Breck believed Long played politics behind the scenes, whispering in producers' ears, subtly undermining him to gain favor. Whether or not that was true, Breck believed I tanned in Hollywood. Perception is everything. Even years later, long after the Big Valley had ended, Breck's feelings hadn't softened. In interviews, he would praise Barbara Stanwyck or Lee Majors, but when Richard Long's name came up, silence. Or worse, a bitter, knowing look. To Breck, Long wasn't just a rival. He was the embodiment of everything wrong with the industry: favoritism, backroom deals, and hollow charm. And for a man like Peter, who valued authenticity above all else, that was unforgivable. But Breck's struggles weren't over yet. In the final chapter of his life, a new battle would emerge that slowly took everything from him. For a man who once filled television screens with thunderous energy and firebrand passion, Peter Breck's final years were tragically quiet. In the late 2000s, those closest to him began to notice subtle changes. He was forgetting things. Conversations would trail off. Stories he once told with perfect detail now came out fragmented or not at all. Then came the heartbreaking diagnosis: dementia. It was the ultimate betrayal for a man whose weapon had always been his voice: loud, unfiltered, magnetic. In his prime, Breck could command a room with a single word. Now, words began slipping through his fingers like smoke. And as the disease progressed, so did the silence. His wife, Diane, became his full-time caretaker. She watched the man she'd loved for decades slowly vanish behind a wall of confusion, and stillness. The outbursts that once defined his on-screen presence faded into long, hollow pauses. Even his legendary anger, so volatile, so alive, melted away, replaced by something far sadder: absence. Friends from Hollywood reached out, but Breck rarely recognized them. Some visits ended in heartbreak when Peter would stare blankly, unable to place a familiar face. Others didn't visit at all, not knowing what to say to a man who once was the conversation. And yet, through it all, Diane stayed. Loyal, patient, and heartbreakingly alone in the fight. She said later that Peter never lost his spirit completely. Even in the fog of dementia, she'd sometimes see Flickershy's eyes lighting up at a Western playing on television, a faint smile when she mentioned the Big Valley, echoes of the cowboy he used to be. By the time Peter passed in 2012, at age 82, the man the world had known was long gone. But for those who remembered those who saw him light up screens with raw, untamed force, the silence left in his wake felt deafening. Peter Breck didn't fade quietly from the public eye. He stormed through it, left a crater, and then vanished. But what he left behind still echoes today. In the golden age of television, Breck wasn't just another actor playing cowboy. He was the storm at the center of every scene. While others played stoic or smooth, he was raw, wild, and loud. His Nick Barkley didn't ask for attention, he demanded it. And for many viewers, that made him unforgettable. But Breck's impact didn't stop at the Big Valley. Fans still talk about his fiery performances in Maverick, The Outer Limits, 77 Sunset Street Rip, and countless B-movie westerns. He had a face made for the frontier and a voice made for the stage, which made his descent into silence all the more tragic and profound. His students remember him not just as a celebrity, but as a mentor who gave a damn. He didn't teach acting like a formula, taught it like a war cry. He'd tell them, if you're going to say something, make it matter, and make it loud. In a world that often forgets its television cowboys, Peter Breck is still remembered not because he was the best looking or the most famous, but because he was the loudest, the most alive, and maybe the most honest. Even now, fans post clips of his explosive scenes, marveling at the sheer force of him. Younger viewers stumble upon his work and ask, who was that guy? The answer is always the same. That was Peter Breck. You don't forget him. Peter Breck's story is one of fiery passion, towering talent, and heartbreaking loss. He wasn't just a television star, he was a force of nature, someone who poured every ounce of himself into his roles and his life. From his rise as the unforgettable Nick Barkley to the private battles he fought far from the cameras, his journey was anything but ordinary. What makes Breck's legacy linger isn't just his iconic characters or his booming presence on screen, it's the raw honesty he brought to every performance. And the undeniable truth that behind the bravado was a man who loved fiercely and endured deeply. His final years remind us how even the strongest can be humbled by life's cruel twists. But even in silence, Peter Breck's spirit never truly faded. It lives on in the stories he told, the lives he touched, and the unforgettable roar of a cowboy who refused to be ignored. So next time you hear that booming voice or see that blazing temper on screen, remember this was a man who gave everything he had, and then some. Peter Breck wasn't just an actor, he was a legend,